There we go. All right. Guys, I'm getting rusty. I need to do this more frequently again. And then you'll get smooth transitions and perfection again. And thanks for the sub, butter knife. But let me introduce you. Episode 99, guys. We're getting there, right? So my first guest, NFC for one of the biggest groups in the game. Actually, both IFCs for the biggest groups in the game. Like, there's not that many small groups left in the game, I assume, right? Um, we will talk about that later, but one of the biggest groups in the game, mainly responsible for the EU time zone of a non-EU time zone based alliance, which I think is pretty interesting. Um, and yeah, thanks for making it onto the show. Even though he's like at work basically, like that little break he has, he is sacrificing for the show. So thanks for coming on,
Busted.
BJK. I didn't mean to call you out. Hopefully your co-workers are not watching. Um,
Whoops.
yeah, that's also the main reason why we might have to cut this episode a little shorter than we usually do. Um, and then my second guest, he is actually driving right now. So it turns out no FC has time for anything nowadays. Like nobody is like all the students and so on. They're all grown up now, all working. Um, and no time for internet spaceships anymore. So Securitas Protector, old FC for Horde. I say old FC as if that's negative, but there's a bit of history. Also, we fought a couple times over the year. Um, and he is the leader of the SIG, the Bean Foreign Legion, right? So that's the guys that usually deploy forwards. Kind of, I mean, I kind of want to compare that to what Init is to the Imperium, right? Like when there's a war brewing, usually it's Init deploying first, doing shit. And in Horde's case, it's probably the Bean Foreign Legion deploying first, doing shit. Whatever it is, sometimes it might be a massive war kicking off. Sometimes it might just be, a little bit of fun for the weekend. But yeah, so yeah, thanks for making it on, Securitas, for making time in the car. So if his mic cuts out, guys, just saying that right now, his mic sounds good, but every now and then there might be a tunnel coming. So, but yeah, thanks for coming on.
Oh yeah, thanks. And
All right, so guys, the number one thing I want to talk about today, and I mean, you can guess it, right? There's a lot of conflict going on in the north. Like it all, as always, there's always a history to everything, right? There's not just like, oh yeah, two guys say like, hey, let's fight, and they're fighting. There's usually a reason why, and that reason why has another reason why, and so on, right? So it's all develops. So like, I gotta be honest, like over the last year or so, I lost track of like who is fighting who, and who is like suddenly mad at the other guy, and then suddenly like people are being evicted from Fatabulas and so on, and like so maybe BJK, you wanna give me a little bit of a history, like a short version of that, like how
Yeah,
did this
sure.
all come to
So,
be?
yeah, this has been quite the build up to the war. I think the war was officially declared in like kind of June last year. With essential since Fraternity and Winter Coalition moved out of the Dren regions and into Veil of the Silence and Tribute, um, all the people we've been kind of pushing against then have become what B2 is now. So we've been pushing when we came through Venal, we're pushing up against Boss, when we were trying to take space from Veil and Tribute. The old Trigger Happy guys, Volta, um, all those different groups, Scumlords, they've all kind of consolidated into this smaller pack. They've from the updates Norris has put out, we've got this neighbor near to us that hasn't really been responsive to communications, and it's gone to the point we just decided that we would rather have literally anybody else living next to us than them. So like we just want to get rid of the Voltrai hubs, get rid of replace the leadership of GTC with somebody else. literally anybody else, and that's what our goal was there. We can't have neighbors that are kind of like harboring all the enemies we've had over the last 2 years combined. It almost like feels like final boss fight at this stage for like probably a better way to
But
sum
why
all that
not?
up.
Why can't you?
Oh, because you want to have at least a little bit of buffer. You never know like what's brewing inside there. It's far too risky to
When
have
I hear
someone like
that, I'm like, man, the best times that Init had was when the Horde was right next door, basically. When Horde was in Fate and so on, and we were in Fountain, we had like, I think it was 7 jumps to my Titan, and I could bridge right onto Horde rock calls. That was just like we didn't know what we had, you know what I mean? And I think maybe you guys are in the same position right now. Maybe you don't know what you have right now.
In some ways, if the space was that used, if it was worth roaming around their space, if there were rock walls to jump on top of, if there was a reason for us to have content like that, then sure. But there isn't. It's all just turtled up. So obviously we're looking after the EU time zone and the EN core here. The roaming content, we're finding more fun roaming into Horde space than roaming into war territory because there's nothing to do outside of skirmishes there. So I see the point. Like if you're on the border with someone who you're like at that scale of conflict, it could be different. But even though we've not had much progress taking those iHubs off them, we've still had like loads of really good skirmishes there. So roaming content wise, it's not great, but the fights we've had from the back of it there's been a lot of content there. I'm surprised at how much we've been able to grow, given that that's most of our content, I guess.
Yeah. So, what do you do if that stops? That's my question. I guess like we're jumping ahead here a little bit. I feel like, but that's
we'll
like at
never
the
be
end of the
bored.
day, that's my question.
Yeah.
I think I don't know.
Some
Sure.
of the most memorable fights we've had over the last year, obviously particularly key that this is kind of your question, is that when we have like your fleets coming through into Vale to poke an iHub, sorry, like an Answer Blex, where they've had Beyond B coming through with a couple hundred people from one of his streams. Like that's been the fights that people sometimes get a bit shaky afterwards. I think fighting so outnumbered in EU time zone, that's made some of those fights a little bit more difficult. Obviously, it's a bit different in recent times. Now we've got some
What do you mean outnumbered?
mercenaries to work with.
Are you suggesting you guys were outnumbered fighting me and Bjorn?
No. The content we're happening now. What's happening now? Now fighting against you and Bjorn, it was always good. Like if you brought 50 or 100 people, like if we outformed, if it's a roaming gang we're outforming, we'll down ship and we'll have fun and we'll go against it there. Because in those kind of fights, you're happy to trade because you want everybody to have fun. In skirmish based content, is a bit different. You've got an objective to fight over, and that's like they feel more important. If you were ref from one of our answer blexes and we lost that fight and our answer blex got refed, oh no, that's a couple of hours of minor inconvenience. But if there's a structure that you're trying to keep alive, maybe it's one in a hostile stages system that's a bit more nerve-wracking, a bit more critical, a bit more people make more emotional decisions on those fights.
Yeah, I mean, sure. But so the main motivation is you don't want the the bad guys. You don't want them to harbor the bad guys. It sounds like real life politics, harboring terrorism, and you're getting terrorized by the evil small gangers from NPC space. Also,
what a parallel to draw.
That's what it sounds like.
If we were evicted by 8 people in Germany, we'd have a worry about that. But no, this is a little different. All the people bundled up in Fade.
Alright, and then so Securitas, what is your motivation in the whole thing? Like I can take a guess, but I don't want to say like you guys are there for the fun or what?
Yeah. So for a little bit of backstory, we just a few months ago were in the north, kind of doing very similar things, and in that case, the motivation was purely just content. So for a SIG of our size, and I do want to emphasize we are very small. So BFL, which is my part of the SIG, we fly with PL, but our part of the SIG we have like less than 250 people in the SIG, like, total. And obviously, that's across all time zones. Not everybody's as active as everybody else, so we're quite small. So our motivation was to kind of find somewhere where we could get fights that were challenging but winnable. So, going to Delve or Fountain and trying to fight under a hostile super cap umbrella of, tens of thousands of people doesn't really work. So, so Pure Blind was kind of the logical choice. So we went up there. We had some really good fights. Towards the end, it got, like BJK said, they tended to turtle pretty aggressively, and it kind of, slowly petered out. And then we had other stuff going on down south with her. So, and now it's mostly Bill, but we did take a mercenary contract from Fraternity to help balance out the EU time zone.
Sorry, your mic is cutting out now.
Obviously, B3. Oh, sorry. Is this so bad?
Yeah, so I could understand what you said.
Okay.
So basically, it was a mercenary contract so Fraternity bought you guys to help out. I didn't even know.
Yeah. It sweetened the deal for sure. B3 is like this passive, EU
Sorry.
Pretty, they do their best, but they just don't have that many people in the EU time zone.
Sorry, your mic is just a little bit too big. I guess we have to give you a little bit of a rest with your connection. But maybe BJK, like, you're aware too. Like, yep. So what is he trying to say here?
So the most recent time around, now BFL have redeployed to Pure Blind. That is on a contractual basis. Before it was, I believe, content deployment. It was a bit of fun over there. Pure Blind was a very hot place. Got a lot of good fights, a lot of good content out there.
So why kill
it? But the numbers, it's just third partying. What's wrong with the bit of third partying? But in more recent times, it's been a bit more aggressive. So one of the big things Lewis put in his most recent update is that when things are looking bad for B2 and GTC and the people in there, they'll go on Reddit. I've seen it's been extremely salty today. They like to turtle up. They had 1,100 people in their staging system today, complaining that our one full fleet was going to kill their Fortizar, which sounds realistic. They'll complain and try and get a bit more pity and people to come along and help them, but we'll back up people coming to help us with money and not tears. So
I can only assume it's a similar situation to what Init was in at the beginning of World War B2, right? Or Vietnam, whatever we call that war now, okay? Where Init can form a shit ton of people, but we can't form that every day, right? We have to pick and choose, and then it's easy for the opponent to see and say like, oh, we're gonna punt this time, huh? And then made you form, right? It's like we're all very aware of that, right? So like, if they all form you in there, like, you can still, in your mind, I know that mindset, like, it's still a victory, like, haha, it's weird, but like, what are they gonna do, right? It's
that's a huge thing.
Can you guys hear me now, by the way?
Yeah, it sounds good now.
Okay, so they actually can form pretty big just on a flash form any day. It's not going to be 1,100, but even before fire came up, they could form 400 or 500 people just on flash forms. So, I mean, yes, they can't form 1,100 every day probably, but they can form a lot of people at a moment's notice, way, way more than Frat can, So they're not in too much danger, I think.
You don't think they're in too much danger? So
no.
So I mean, the way I see it now, like the XIX move up, it's not gonna be such a huge numbers boost for them anyway, because like half the XIX guys are kind of going somewhere else, Fraternity, for example, right? And then so you have Fraternity, a huge group, even in Euro time zone. I mean, you can, I guess, claim a lot of that credit, like you build up that Euro time zone over the years. So it's not a small time zone either. And then they have the China time zone on top of that, right? You can still, go ref stuff like crazy in China time zone. Nobody can contest that. Nobody in the game can contest Fraternity's China time zone.
No, but we don't want them to have to do that every day because that's not fair on the pilots. It's not fair to get people to mass reinforce stuff knowing that there's a very slim chance we could follow it up. So there's kind of two things to the back of that. This is a very time zone heavy game. Like we've got a lot of people, on both sides. We're informally calling it the alarm clock wars because there's such a discrepancy between what times people are active and could achieve any objectives. It's very difficult to make that headway. But the EU time zone's growing here because even if there's a timer we can't contest, we'll always find something to do. If you make the enemy's form and you can't take that head on, go and do something else. Like there's loads of memes about me and my 30 harpies going on adventures. Like if I form and there's 150 people there on our team and I know that we're going to be up against 250, 400, whatever, it's not fair to keep people around like waiting to see, can we take this fight? Can we not? Or we'll just be honest with them, like we can't do it, but we know they're going to go and they're going to go do something else. Like they formed pretty hard. They're probably going to do a shield timer because they love shield timers. So they're going to do that. So if you want to stick around, give it half an hour. We'll go out in harpies and we'll make them create an SRP link by killing the stragglers, and people will be up for that. And whilst you can't make the pushes that you wanted to, you still have to have fun with the people who want to be there. But regarding the time zone discrepancies, we went down to Esoteria in January to fight against the Army of Mangoes last year. The Army of Mangoes, obviously a big CN alliance. They had some Euros and Americans supporting them as well. And we were making a lot of the timers in EU. We were fighting over some of it in US. But the grinding from us against them was so consistent that a lot of the players down there left Esoteria, and some of them joined GTC, some of them joined Fire. Like they kind of split in different directions. They left like a 16-hour vulnerability window in Army of Mango space where we could go through uncontested. Blue Cannon dropped me a message one day at like 3 p.m. and said, "Hey, you're around to chat," which is usually a bad, like you don't want to get those kind of messages. But this particular one is like, well, we now know that all the other EU time zone groups down there have left. Do you think we could ref a Keepstar with torpedo bombers? And that's the RTAG ARKN Keepstar. We managed to just take a drifter wormhole. Have you used drifter wormholes before, Pando?
I've heard of them. They have a lot of connections or something, right? Something
yeah,
like this.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Some Twitch streamers really good with them.
Hmm.
Watching some.
I'll have to investigate.
We managed to get a connection to Black Ops Battleship and range and just reinforce a hostiles staging Keepstar at 1800 Eve time with like 150 torpedo bombers, and the only contest we had was a single tornado who tried his best, but
did he kill a bomber?
He didn't. The Keepstar
He
killed a
didn't
couple.
kill one?
No. Poor guy. Poor guy. That would
Yeah.
have been the true hero of
Yeah.
the story. But after you see an alliance that big, Army of Mangoes were quite big. They were notable back then. When you see an alliance like that fall apart because there's no Omni time zone coverage, that's really the wake up that other groups need this as well. And whilst we're not making loads of progress in EU time zone, we're finding something to do. They're not making much progress as CN time zone. I think we've lost a Fortizar now in FTAG N. We've still got another fort and a Keepstar, and another one anchoring. But while both sides are struggling to make progress in their core time zones, we're still doing something. We're still having fun with that.
But basically, both of you are saying that the B2 guys are, like number-wise, like at least equal to what you have in Euro time zone. But then you have the China time zone and a lot of horde, extra numbers backing you up too, right? So, I mean, isn't that like overwhelming number-wise? Like, isn't that like beating down on the small guys? And like, aren't those guys the last alliances trying to be kind of independent from the bigger blocks? Like,
that's what they said.
so what's like? I don't quite still don't get the motivation behind the whole like making this like as big of a war as it is now, right?
It's got a lot of attention from certain groups.
Almost too much, I guess, right? Or is Securitas, you trying to say something, but I think your mic is actually cutting out before you even say anything. It's not working. I'm sorry.
I don't think it's like.
No.
It's notable now because there's a real chance of some EU time zone conflicts where both sides can throw down and actually fight. What we've seen for the past few months is a bit of like a back and forth, a bit of a tug and war, a bit of like cheeky going behind the lines to kill the odd straggler, or like trying to alarm clock and get something and then doing the timer the next day. There's been a lot of back and forth, but the next few weeks are going to be sides actually committing. We had Siberian squads come and join Winter Coalition in January, and the energy Hanzo's brought across has been incredible. But we've had some really good throwdowns in early EU time zone, thanks to him and his team, and that's been the closest we've had to some real good fights up there. We had 2 weeks of bliss where it was pretty even numbers, and then fire, and now in C4C as well. And we're like, so now with BFL coming to join, we should see a bit more.
Still shit. Securitas, yeah. You might want to reconnect or something.
Sorry.
And now it sounds alright. But yeah. That's what happens when you do it from the car.
I'll say it quickly before
it do it
gets bad again. That I think it's not as big as, I think basically B3 are making this a lot bigger than it is. They're not under any real threat at the moment, in my opinion. This is mostly like border skirmishes and stuff like that. Like, I don't, they can, anytime you can form 1,100 people, even if it's only once in a while, like Frat in EU time zone and BFL combined, I mean, we can't even form probably half that. So if there's any really important time, just saying.
So, but like, wouldn't you guys want everyone to think it's not too much of a threat? It's like you're kind of biased in that regard, right? Like, are you guys worried?
I mean, sure, but
are you guys worried that Imperium would say like, "Hey, that looks like fun. Let's pick the B2 side and just, make sure these guys are not getting evicted from their space"?
I mean, if Goons are going to follow the track record that they have recently, I'm not too worried about them doing anything at all. In it, I don't know. I don't think they like fire very much, though. So
Shine's not predictable. In it, I don't know. In it,
no,
you never know, huh?
But here's the thing: if they help, I don't think there's much in it for them, because if in it helps B3, there's no fight. Nothing will happen.
B3,
so there's really no reason. Like, if they do that, they'll just screw themselves out of content. So they can, but Frat will still hold the line in Chinese time zone, so they won't lose anything strategic.
Wait a second. If Init deploys to help B3 and makes sure B3 doesn't get evicted and secures the borders for them, cleans up their space a little bit or whatever, I don't know, but I'm just guessing that
it would be super boring, though, right? Like,
well,
all that would happen is that.
But what's the alternative?
Like, nothing would happen, because we already cannot fight a max GTC B3 form, right? So if you add init on it, then we still can't fight a max form plus init. So it's just, it doesn't change a whole lot, and it's just really boring for init, I think.
But like, so you can't fight the max form, but they can't max form every time. So like, there's fights there that you have and stuff like this. So I don't know. I just, from my experience, like from Init and Fountain, when you guys attacked, one of the major issues was like, we can form enough, but we can't form enough every day, right? So it's like the constant pressure that will, make stuff crumble. And at some point you have to make the decision. And I think the decision is closer than you might think, where, Starfleet or, I guess it's Starfleet leading the whole thing, would have to say like, hey, we have to kind of, look at like moving out, because like this is getting too much, right? So that's from an outsider's perspective. Like, I think he would call it early enough, so that's why I'm saying, like, he's not gonna wait till the last minute, right? I'm not saying that's gonna be tomorrow or next week, but like
But this
overall,
isn't the last minute. This is
no, that's what I'm
finally a
saying.
chance that they're going to be tested, because right now, well, we don't even have even numbers right now, as Securitas said, and the people on Cesspool have done a pretty fair assessment of how big they actually are now, B2 or B3. This is the chance that we're going to get some fights and really take them on. When we took Vale and Tribute, we were met by, we were forming 50 people in EU time zone up against 150, 200. But the way we slowly took that down is that they were a group of 6-7 alliances. We picked them one at a time and we said, right, 1700, 1900, every single day, we're going to come and attack something of yours. And whether we'd follow up on it or not, we'd slowly put the pressure on those on the outside and work inwards. And that was enough over time that we managed to chip away at them until they moved a little bit further backwards. So a similar strategy could be deployed here, but they're all living in the same keep star. So how do we go about that? Do you pick the alliance that has the worst SRP wallets and you actively focus them on grid? Do you try and only form
That's the
things that
go-to
you know
move in
some
time
of the
fights,
alliances
right?
are? Who knows? There's
Why
ways to
wouldn't
do
you do
it,
it with
but if the
Citadels?
reaction is like, oh, this is going to be a bit difficult, so I'm going to leave, then that's another argument for us to say the person in command of B2 is not the person who should be in command of B2. If it looks difficult and they try and leave, that's not what I'd want to see.
Well, I'm not
when
saying
it's
that's what's happening, but like, I just know what it is to be under pressure from big groups like Fraternity and Horde, because exactly that was our situation, right? And then you like, and that's exactly what we did. Is like we called it off in Fountain earlier than people might have expected, because like, what if you lose like all these assets and you have like a grind of a fight you can't really win for like a constant time of, like, let's say we would have fought like a month longer. We could have done that, right? But at what cost? Like, our FC is completely burnt out, taking a break for the next half a year. What? See, it's like, there's resources that are not like in game. There's like actual,
yeah,
like,
you don't want that
human resources. It's a real thing, right? So
yeah,
you kind of want to maintain your mental health, I guess. It's like,
But even if we're at full swing, say we're making like a series of timers and we know that each day we're going to form at a particular time, 40% of the content people will be logging into will be structured PvP ops, but 60% will be standing fleet. 60% will be making sure that those 2 retributions on killing all your Ishtars, it'll be making sure that those gates are covered. So it's not only war level content. You've got to, if you're working on Alliance on that scale, you've got to make sure that everybody, if you only get an hour a week to log in and play, you want to make sure that that person's protected and able to do what they want to do. You want to make sure that their epithel doesn't get bubbled on a gate as they're trying to do their like once a week PI haul. There's way more to FCing than just calling like targets in the big fights and making sure signers are in place. So obviously the content of this is all about the war, but if that's all the FCs do, then they will get burnt out. There's so many more things that people can be doing.
But yeah, so aren't you guys like making like timers, like so many timers that it's like inevitable for them to they have to form. Like, if you have defensive timers, you have to form. You're kind of forced to do that, or at least have someone on standby, watch it, stuff like this. So like, it will weigh on the FCs over time, right? And one of the weird things, I mean, I don't want to talk about Ansiblix too much, but it's like the war has kind of been fought from regions away over jump bridges only, right? Like, you guys have been just using jump bridges to get there, but there's very little risk for you guys. It's not like your forward stage in a Fortizar that could be refed and then killed and then end the deployment. Like, no, you guys are still at home. Yeah, you can ref, maybe even kill an Ansiblix, but like, impact is going to be minimal, right? And they have to expose themselves to get to that Ansiblix too, right? So it's a very tricky situation, I think, for an FC team, which is probably not that big if you think about it. Like, they don't have that many big names in their FC ranks, right? There's a Starfleet commander with his team of
they do.
Francis and like, give me some names. Francis, Starfleet,
Graf,
Wolf.
so they have Graf on Ortho, they have Francis, they have Starfleet. I mean, I'm not saying all of them are like, platinum tier or anything like that, but they have Shattered, they have Spicy, they have Rots, they have, what's the other one? And they have, sometimes their SD channel has like 15 people in it. Big.
Your mic is fucking up again.
Got some good ones as well, and it's they.
Who's the best? Who's the most feared one? Give some morale boost to the guys. Let's go. Who's the most feared?
Starfleet's very good.
All right.
Because if he's pinging,
Starfleet's good.
We know he's done his prep work. If Shosu's there, I know he's done his prep work. If it's some of the others, there's a bit of communication issues. I think they need to get a little bit better on. There's a big discrepancy there, but they do have some really solid guys. And sure, if you're defending, you feel like you have to look after all of them every day. You've got to oversee every timer, and it's fine to oversee every timer, but the resources you commit to each event can be managed as well. Like, you don't want to have 1,100 people on standby for an armor timer of a Fortizar. Like, that's outrageous. But if
Depends on the Fortizar.
I guess.
Oh, I mean, that's Fortizars that are worth it. That's for sure.
But if it's only a strain if you worry and commit everything all of the time. And I guess that's the luxury of the attackers. You can pick which ones you do and don't want to take. But we don't want the CN waking up and like reffing stuff, and then us not to follow it up. That's only going to create tension this side as well. So yeah, we've got to be careful about managing that.
All right, so let's talk about what do you think is going to happen next? Like, what do you guys think is going to be the next development? Like, is there going to be bigger changes in the dynamic of that war?
Yeah, so I have a suspicion that it's going to be kind of like, everyone's going to be watching to see what the other side does for a little bit, I think, because, was with Fire moving up that they need to secure some space for Fire at some point, right? So maybe not right now, but at some point, but now that we're up here, they might want to play things more cautiously, right? So I don't know if they're going to try something right away. So in the meantime, I think BJK and me, realistically, I mean, I don't think we're really at the point where we think, oh, we can invade and like push them out of their space, right? So they just have way, way, way too many numbers for that. And I don't even know if that's entirely consistent with the goals anyway, at least in the short term. So I kind of think it'll be like little like skirmishes over small stuff, and it'll kind of escalate from there. I don't know whether Init or Goons will get involved. I don't think it's a very good idea for them for the reasons that I said before.
Sounds like you're trying to talk me out of things.
What does it sound like, Pando?
I said it sounds like you're trying to talk me out of things.
No, I mean, like, look, I mean, I'm serious. Like, if Goons, I think it could be pretty fun for me if Goons come up, because I'm mostly in U.S. time zone, and like, there's not a lot happening there. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it would be a very. I like to think of myself as pretty good at planning deployments. I've done a lot of them now, and most of them, not to brag or anything, most of them have been pretty successful. If I were Goons or Init, I would not look at this and say this looks like a good deployment. But I don't know. They might come to a different conclusion. But I have a feeling that they might try something with a SIG or something like that. Maybe. I guess we'll see. And that would make things interesting. But it also depends what they do. Like, if they just come up here only to shoot at us, I think the content will peter out quickly, because there will be so much favor on the GTC side, especially in EUTZ. It'll just be like non-contestable, and so it'll just be really boring. But it kind of depends. If they come up here and they shoot everybody and they're just kind of chaotic, it could be pretty fun.
Would the rest of Horde deploy if Init or Goons would deploy up there? Would then the rest of Horde say, like, finally, let's go? What do you think?
So I think there's two answers to that question, and I'm not Gobbins, okay? This is just my conjecture. So the strategic answer, I think, like, if I wanted to play it smart, I would say no, because then Goons and Init go up there and they have nothing to do, right? they're like fighting some SIG and they grind into Chinese time zone and don't get anything done and it really sucks. The fun answer would be yes, because then we would get to fight them. But I don't honestly know. Maybe that would be too much for us. Maybe, I don't know. Who knows if we could fight all that? I have no idea. So I think
Depends
there's
on
kind of
who's the
two
attacker,
answers.
right? That's the
Yeah,
reality of things. There is a defensive advantage, right? There's only I think there's only a defensive advantage to a degree. At some point, at numbers, it doesn't really matter that much more. But I
right.
think when you
I
throw
think from a
Titans and Supers
strategic,
into the mix, oof.
I think from a strategic perspective, if you want to play like the political games and stuff, it would be a very bad idea to deploy and try to attack and like reward Init and Goons and everybody for going up there and like give them a defensive war that's easy. I don't think that would be a very smart strategic
Because
move.
that's
But
what
also
Horde
like,
tried to do. Remember? That's exactly what Horde
yeah,
tried to do with XIX when Init was fighting XIX, and then Goons moved in, and then Horde deployed in a defensive position, saying like, "Oh
yes,
yeah,
and
you've been fighting for several
it was
months. You're like fucking done with this shitty war, but like now take us on. We're defending right here, right?
yeah.
It's a
So
similar situation."
I don't think I would want to make the same mistake, right? So from a strategic perspective, I don't think it would be very smart. So if Goons and Init came up, and I was like playing like, the strategic game here, I'm saying like, there's arguments to be made for going as well. Like you would get content, blah, blah, blah. But I think, Frat would be fine. I don't think they would lose anything in Chinese time zone, really. And so they wouldn't be under threat. But Goons and Init would just be sitting around twiddling their thumbs most of the time. I think it would be really boring for them. So if Horde didn't show up, that's pretty risky for Goons and Init, right? They plan this big deployment, they go up there, and then nothing happens again, you know? So I think that would not be a very smart move from them. But like I said, who knows? Maybe Starfleet will go over there and ask them too. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, you never know, right? It's just
But like
so.
you could make arguments either way for going and for not going. But I think on paper, like the smart decision would not be to not go. But it's all up
Not
to
be to
Goblins. I
not
don't
go.
make any of those.
So it would be to
No, it
go.
would be to not go. Sorry,
All right.
but I don't make those kind of decisions. That's all up to Goblins. But you know, like I said, I think in it, and who Shines, like you said, Shines is unpredictable, but I kind of doubt he really wants to go and like bail fire out after. Like, I don't think, like, I don't know how satisfying it was for
We've
you
done this
guys. I know
before.
for us, well, I know
We've
for
done this
us,
before.
like, fire left really early. Like, it wasn't a super, like, it was satisfying in the sense that we got what we wanted, but there wasn't a lot of meat to that campaign. And I think Init would probably agree that they also did not get a lot of meat. There weren't a lot of battles to sink your teeth into. And so I think it would be really strange to me if like Shines like turned around and is like, oh, hey, like we kind of got cheated out of a bunch of fights from you.
Yeah.
Now we're probably
So
not get a whole lot of fights because you're already stronger in the time zone where all your timers are, right? It just
yeah, I
doesn't
think
make
the
sense.
thing about
So,
Shines,
I don't know.
and I think he kind of has instilled that mindset in it too. Like he's a little bit restless, right? He can only sit in his staging
Yeah.
and enjoy Fountain for so long, right? So, like, I'm not saying I don't have any info or anything, right? Before you guys read into my reaction or whatever. Like, I'm staying out of Alliance stuff for a year now, so I like don't even try to read out of it. But I would say like, why not? Right? That's usually what he would say. So it's like I wouldn't be surprised if he said like, yeah, let's go, let's like deploy up there and help those guys out. Also, like he was, I think, surprised by how quickly XIX just like called it. But like if you look at the numbers with Horde, and that's why I was surprised. Like, how did this come to be? Like now we're working with Horde to evict this big group. I was not a fan of this. Okay, I gotta be open and honest about it. I was open and honest to Shines about it too. I was like, what are we doing? Like, I don't get it, right? Like, there's one group that's kind of independent, and then now we're working with hordes of all people together to evict these guys. Like, didn't feel right to me. And then now they're up there.
So Pando,
maybe he sees my side a little bit more, and maybe he would go up there and say like, okay, let's make sure that at least stay alive. You know. We didn't mean to
I don't
kill
think I
people
don't
off.
I literally I think there's zero risk of them not being alive, to be perfectly honest with you. Pretty much zero. Like just given their defensive position and the numbers arrayed against them, they would have to fuck up, immensely to lose that. And that's with all what you were saying about being the defender and that being like notwithstanding, I think there's no way they lose this. That they might lose some big fights, they might lose the ISK war, blah blah blah, they might lose some objectives. I don't think they're in any danger of being evicted. That's just my opinion. The second thing I'd want to say though, Pando, is that look at how Fire getting evicted actually changed the landscape of Eve, and I think it changed it for the better
You really think
because
so? Okay.
yes, and I'll explain why. So after World War B, like nullsec was like very polarized, right? Everyone's afraid to reset each other. Everyone's like kind of all turtled up and like like it was kind of us versus them, right?
It still is though.
So now test is not yeah, but a lot less so. So look at it this way, right? So before it was like Imperium versus the rest of the game, basically, right? Now, okay, Fire is no longer with PanFam. Okay, they're now not part of that anymore. Test is gone. Legacy's gone. RMC was never really part of it. They're gone. But now there's a third block that's actually pretty strong. And one of my guys ran some numbers this morning. B3 and Fire together have the same amount of Z-kill actives as Horde plus PL. So that's not counting like maybe NC or something, but like it's in the same ballpark. Now, do they have less supers? Sure. Are they a newer block? Sure. But now we kind of have a 3-block situation. There's a bunch of empty space, and it's not this tired old thing where it's like Imperium versus PanFam anymore, right? So I think that's a much more interesting game. Well, not yet, but that also depends. Like that's why I think what Init and Goons do will be very interesting, because are they going to preserve that dynamic or not? I guess we'll find out.
But
just to reiterate, with this, there's people talking about evictions over here. Our goal is not to evict people; it's just to get Volta out of that part of space. Like we have no qualms with Brave. We never have. We were quite keen to work with them before they used our Keepstar chain and set up in Pure Blind. Like we're happy with everybody over there. The only people we want out is Volta specifically, and replacing, because they are the leadership of GTC. So like they can stay. That's fine. Like that's absolutely no problem whatsoever. We're happy with that. Our victory condition is not to torch 3 regions of the last alliance in the game.
But what is the victory condition?
And Pando, like regardless of, with all respect to BJK, regardless of whether it was eviction or not from Frat's point of view, just given the strength that BFL and Frat have, it's just not on the table at the moment. Things, you never know the future, but even if BJK was like, yeah, fuck GTC and Fire, we're going to totally evict them out of their space, I think the chances of it happening are still about the same, which is not very high. And so kind of what I'm getting at, it's not just like one big block versus the other big block, and part of that is because of the actions that Init and Horde took. Fire was pretty much in the PanFam camp, and now they're not.
But what you said was like, look, the landscape is now changed for better after XIX got evicted. But like, better compared to what? Better compared to day one after the big war? Sure, right? Like day one after the big war, it was absolutely polarized, like you said. But like right before the eviction, I thought that wasn't too bad of a situation. There was a group right there that's kind of neutral, doing their own thing. Sure, people can always have like personal issues with their leaders.
But they're not really neutral, right? On a strategic level, they weren't neutral, right? If it ever came to like a big fight again, they would have been with us.
If they're
that was actually to our advantage to maintain that.
Yeah, correct. So when the first deployment happened, right? So remember, Init deployed down to Esoteria, secured Esoteria, and then we're poking into XIX space, or Fire space, I should say, for some fun and content and stuff like this, right? Obviously, Fire kind of overreacting rhetorically too, saying like this is like a war for extinction or whatever, and we're like, that wasn't actually the intention. Similar to what you guys are doing, right? But
Well, to some degree it was. I mean, you guys pushed all the way up almost into Deaderid. I mean, that's
Yeah, I mean, Faithabilis was cleared out at some point, right?
and most of Tenerife as well. And I mean, you were on the gates of Deaderid, which was like their their core space. They had lost a couple of regions already, which is far like Brave and GTC. They haven't even ever lost a system yet in months and months, right? So it's like totally different situation.
But so the point I was trying to get at is like what we eventually did, and which was my argument for like, hey, let's call an end to this at some point, right? Was like you force them to pick a side. That's what's happening. You force people to pick a side. Like you push them into, in this case, we push them into the PanFam side. Like that's simply what was happening, right? And,
I mean, they kind of were already.
They kind of were. Like this stuff doesn't happen like overnight, right? It's not like a switch on and off thing.
Now they're not kind of anything. Now they're on their own, right? Like, yeah, I mean, maybe if Horde tried to actually evict them, maybe they would start pushing towards Imperium. But what I'm saying is the actions that Shines took and that Gobbins took basically made the game less boring, in my opinion. So it's like more like it's less like I think we really need to get away from the World War B mindset. That's my opinion. I think the more breakups and coalitions there are, the better.
But I think you're lying to yourself if you're saying that's a breakup, that's an improvement. I think that's just like couldn't be further from the truth. That's basically what I'm saying. Like I think we're on the same page of what we would like to have. At least you're saying that. But I think the result of that eviction is like exactly the opposite of what we would want, really. Like, because now they are up there. Sure, for now, they might be not Imperium and not PanFam. But guess what? You guys are pushing them. And they have to pick a side at some point. And they will. They will pick a side.
Well,
and then guess what?
I would contest that. See, I would contest that. I don't think they need to pick a side. They are completely safe. They're not going to lose. I'm just saying, like, you'll see. But, like, Frat can form maybe one full fleet in EU, and kudos to BJK because a long time ago they couldn't do that. And we can form maybe max ping, everyone log in BFL and PL. We can maybe form one full fleet. So that's like not even 500 people. They can form that on a flash form anytime, any day. And if they're really under threat, it'll be significantly more. Like they're not in danger. They don't need to pick a side. This is like pretty low level stuff. That's what I'm saying. It's been kind of overblown. And the other thing is like Imperium also have a choice to make here, right? I mean, they like even if they did want to get close, it's like, do you want to go back to that sort of dynamic? I mean, people have to fight each other, right? So like, at the end of the day, like you have to pick somebody to fight. And so I think the farther we get away from that dynamic, the better. But one thing I would point out about Fire is that this is actually strategically was not a great move for Horde if you're just looking at, gain for Horde and PanFam, right? We basically consciously made a choice to make ourselves weaker in a way because we didn't really get any of those Fire Corps, right? None of them came to us. We got some content, sure, but not a lot. And at the end of the day, like it would have been in our strategic advantage to keep them as close as possible as friends, right? The more the better. But I think Gobbins and I are on the same page that is not a good thing for the future of nullsec if we just turtle up with as many allies as possible. And so I think at the end of the day, hopefully more people follow suit to do this kind of thing and sort of break up their coalitions.
But see, like from my experience, this is just the beginning of like something. You know what I mean? This is not a static thing. It constantly develops. Like one group deploys, or like one group doesn't even deploy. They're staging this from their staging, right? Then they suddenly like, feel like, hey, let's pay these Hordlings like to come over and have some fun. Then you guys show up. Then, NC deploys, for example, right?
I'm very excited. I'm very excited to see some even number fights where both sides can commit to. And if people think that's going to bring more into the table, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But I'm very excited to see what comes of this. And I say even numbers, we're getting close to even numbers. As Securitas says, there's still a massive discrepancy, but the gap is closing.
But like, I keep like hearing things from like both sides, and then both sides are saying like, "Oh, we're outnumbered," right? It's like it's just so weird to me.
Well, that's why I do my posts on the E forums and not Reddit. That's what I'm using that outlet.
Pando, I would challenge you. There's a D scan floating around from this morning of 1100, B3. I would challenge you to
I
find
get that.
anything like it's just and look, I get that we also have some advantages. I'm not saying that we don't, but so I'd like to be pretty straightforward about that. But on the flip side, implying that B3 is outnumbered, it's just that part is just blatantly untrue. Like
And
it's
what
just not even
about
close to true.
NC Dawn? Like, are they deployed yet?
I don't know what NC's plans are with regards to that, to be honest with you. I don't know if they're planning it, but
I have a feeling now.
I don't even know. I don't even know if NC would be enough to swing it. Even so, like I'm telling you, like B3 is basically close to equal size block as like if you look at the numbers. I mean, with Fire, they are now pretty similarly sized to PanFam, the whole PanFam. So if main horde is left at home, it's still going to be, in favor. Maybe, it'll be closer if NC ended up coming up here, I'm sure. But I don't know. It's pretty, as Goons and you, a lot of credit to you guys showed during the big war. I mean, defending your space, if you're willing to really put it on the line, it is very difficult to evict someone from the space that they control the iHubs and the Sinojammers and the timers for. And so I just realistically don't see that happening. Like Goons were super, super, super outnumbered, right? Like nobody has any arguments about that, or at least they, it got better as the war went on.
I'm sure.
Yeah, as the war went on, the numbers kind of evened out a little bit more, but even so, Goons and Init were outnumbered the whole time, and I'm going to be completely honest about that, right? You guys had an uphill battle, but you guys showed that a properly leveraged defender's advantage and a motivated defender, you can do quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's not realistic to talk about, B3 being evicted in the near future. It just doesn't sound plausible to me.
So the end goal, right? We talked about that for a second there. The end goal being that you guys want Volta evicted, though. Isn't that what you said? Mm-hmm. But yep, Volta is staging in the same keep size as everyone else. Like I don't know. Like how do you even achieve that?
It's a lot of ships to shoot through to get to the ones we're aiming at. That's very true. But we're doing it.
But so it might not be the motivation, but like at the end you would have to evict everyone then, right? Isn't that what it comes down to?
That's what this has been about for 7-8 months now. That's why Brave being the wild card in this situation has turned the war the way it has. It was never about them. I think even Dunk himself said that it was a PR move to get involved with GTC. But if we've got to go through and if they're the barriers that they put in our place, we're gonna keep doing it. Like it could have been very easy back in July to just say, you know what, they're quite big, let's go and do something else for a bit. We could have quite easily said that, but the content it's brought us, it's gotten us like a lot closer as an EN speaking community as well. We're really hardening the team, and when that gets consolidated, it's going to be a bit more fierce. But yeah, if it was, the objectives are difficult, and there's been a lot of times where we've had to even say to ourselves and the team on comms, look, we can't do what we wanted to do today. Stick around, we'll do something in 30 minutes. But it's always going to be about finding reasons to play, finding the team something to do. And if we're 250 versus 30, that's fine. I'll still do something. Like Lord knows I will. The BR's not going to look nice, but we'll be there and we'll be having fun, and that's what it's all about.
Duncan and our study dudes is probably fun. I wouldn't know.
So that's something I kind of wanted to ask you a question, Pando, because I'm kind of interested. Because obviously, as the sort of moderator and stuff, you have, and I think rightly so, kind of a skeptical point of view of like the deployment and what Frat's doing, right? Like you're kind of like,
I've seen this story more than once before. I gotta be honest. I've seen this so many times in this game. I've seen it from Init. Don't get me wrong, right? I've seen it from Init's perspective more than once. Like where it's like, for example, like a super light example. We're in Fountain, and there's a jump bridge leading from B-D next door to Fountain to F7C next door to Lowsec. It's a nice little jump bridge to have, really. But the space after World War B2 was neutral. And there was, I think Tri was living there, right? Tri was living there. We had no beef with Tri or anything. And then some people in Init really wanted that jump bridge. So it's like, hey, let's just ask them. And of course they say like, no, fuck no, we don't want you guys to have a jump bridge through our space. And then guess what? We take care of the business and, take the jump bridge by force. And it's just one step. And then suddenly they can't really live there anymore. So they move somewhere else, right? And it's just like, the motivation might just start at like, hey, it would be nice to have a jump bridge. Nobody thinks about like, what is the end result of making that jump bridge happen, right? And it's the same in like larger scale. Like, yeah, you guys would like to like have a little bit of a buffer zone, but what's the end result of actually realizing that goal? Like, what do you have to actually all do to get there? And I think a lot of people.
So let me ask my question, Pando. So kind of what I'm getting at is like the game, like you want to be fighting, right? Pretty much all the time. I mean, that's like the goal of the game. So you have to be fighting somebody, right? So if you, like, let's say you were in charge of BFL, right? Other than Pureblind, like, where would you go? Like, you have to fight somebody and they should be probably stronger than, I mean, I think the ideal deployment, they should be stronger than you, but not too much stronger, right? You want it to be a challenge. Like if you just go and walk all over somebody, there's no fun in that really, and you don't learn anything from it. And but if they, if you say, oh well, you should go to NPC Fountain, it's just not realistic, right? You just get 80 Titans dropped on you if you try something, so that doesn't really work either. So if you have a medium-sized group, you can form 50 to 100 subcaps and a few dreads. Like where do you go?
Yeah, like
so
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with that.
What would you do?
So in a perfect world, there would be more groups of more diverse groups of different sizes where you could actually pick and choose from, right? And that would be the ideal world, which sadly we're not living in. And we could like fill another 5 podcasts about the reasons why that is, but I guess one of the topics I already talked about a little bit. But I think if that's really your goal and you want to do this constantly, going onto a campaign which has the goal of evicting a group that's basically the last independent kind of group in the game, like you have to ask yourself the question, after that you have even less of this, right? After that you have like there's nothing left then. Like what is left then? What if you guys evict Volta? If Volta leaves, all the remaining alliances or corps or whatever in that group will all be forced to pick a side or just call it a day, right? That's how I feel like, though. Like all these groups are like, maybe some of them will say like, the southeast is now free, so maybe some of those groups will settle down there, but it's not going to be the same scale. It's not going to be a deployment size for you, right? So it's going to be.
That's a void that was created 3 weeks ago.
Right.
And this war started Pando, in June last year.
Where would you go though, Pando?
Right now?
That was the question. Yeah, where would you deploy to?
I don't blame you to deploy with its sake, right? It's like I'm not blaming you to do this. Like this is probably the spots where you would go if you have to deploy. Yeah, that's the spot where you would deploy. There's nothing else there, right? You could of course go.
I wanted to go to Cockroach Coalition, but fucking Amelia killed them, so I couldn't go down there anymore. No, but I get what you're saying, Pando. But for me, from my point of view, just realistically, like I don't see by the time that we finish being up there, I don't think B3 will be evicted. So like I just I just don't think, like when I think about that, I just don't see that as happening. So I guess that doesn't really affect my decision making.
I hope you're right, and I also hope that if it was close, that Init would step up and say like, yep, no, like this goes too far. Like what's left after you guys win? So I think, I think that's the reality of things, right? You're pushing. And I think they, before you guys would evict them, Imperium would step in. And then what then? Imperium would step in and then Horde would maybe fully deploy? I don't think so. Because it's a defensive thing then for Init and Imperium. So, I don't know. It's just my guess.
The goal was mass eviction. if the goal was mass eviction, then I think it's quite interesting to entertain the idea of what would happen next when the last independent alliance leaves. But it's not an eviction. They're
But
not
it
the
is
last
though.
independent alliance.
You said
It's
you wanted to evict Volta though.
one group. One group, that's fine. Imagine if you went into Firespace and was just like, right, Severance, I want them gone. If the entire coalition then disbanded, then that's a sign that they weren't the right person to be behind the coalition. That's the same thing here. We don't believe that Volta is the kind of people we want running a coalition on our border. And when they're gone, there'll be some wonderful people to replace them, I'm sure. But nobody needs to pick a side there. We respect alliances of all sizes. We're a very wholesome community. That's how I'd like to.
Peace and prosperity. That's all you guys want.
That's it.
Like hugs and kisses for everyone. And,
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Pando, do you think that Init is going to stay in your guys' political situation forever? Because, I mean,
What do
it's
you
the
mean?
same kind of situation for you guys, where if you had to deploy right now, like I said, it's kind of tough to make a choice where you would go, right? That would actually have
Yeah.
kind of
If only there was
reliable
NPC space in drone space. Guess what? And it would have deployed their modern ones, I'm sure. We'd have a constant
Right.
sig there. But like this is just not an option for us, right? Like
Right.
deploying
So
to
I'm
low
saying
sig
in the
next door.
absence of that option, like, because what I'm hoping for is over the long term, and I don't have any preferences about exactly who, like, I don't have some sort of agenda about, oh, this is who I would want to reset or not. I'm hoping that PanFam and Imperium eventually are either greatly reduced in size or break up. Obviously, I like Horde quite a bit, so I wouldn't want the alliance to dissolve or anything. But I think long term, hopefully that happens. And like I'm hoping that this sort of fire, leaving the sort of PanFam sphere is the first step of that. And so now it's kind of on you guys, I guess, if you guys are going to take the next step. I don't know, but that would be kind of interesting.
We'll see. But I think like on some of the bigger issues, we kind of have to agree to disagree, right? Like I feel like I said earlier, we kind of want the same end result, but we would just go about it like different ways. And I guess that's just what it is, right? And
so
we'll have to
you
wait
would
and
also
see.
want PanFam and Imperium to dissolve eventually.
Of course, dude. I've been the guy in it, and Shines can attest to that, saying from day one, like, fuck this, let's get out. And man,
I don't know if you know this, Pando. I used to be an Init a long time ago.
yeah, I wasn't aware, no.
Back when we were living in Catch with AAA and all that.
All right. Well, we were there twice.
And I remember actually like a lot of people don't know like exactly why Init like is part of the Imperium, and I think there's a fascinating history to that. And part of it, from my discussions with, because I talk quite a bit
getting
with Bliss
dunked on by supers from PanFam.
Yes, so that's exactly it. So there was like all this trauma because Init fought really hard and really well, and they still got evicted, and they were basically like, this can't happen again. And so they were like, Imperium kind of reached out the hand, and they were like, okay. And it's been that way ever since. But part of that was because Init was not big enough to stand on their own, and I think that your guys' recruitment over the last several years has changed that. And in fact, I think probably in your time zone, you guys are actually stronger than Goons now, and that's something I keep track of pretty closely. So I don't actually know that that's true anymore, that you guys couldn't stand. I mean, you guys can probably form just as many as the entire B3 coalition on your own in EU time zone. So you guys are basically a coalition onto yourself in your own time zone. So I think that's very interesting. And, there's potential, I think,
as well, to be fair. I've seen a couple of fraternity rogues die to the initiative and B2.
Well.
Yeah.
Just Raymond in the same place.
I mean, I can only imagine like leaving the Imperium. Like, see, I like I said it from day one on. That's years ago, right? But in all these years, you also built like connections, right, with Asher and the other FCs, right? So like the longer we are in the Imperium, the more unlikely it is, and the environment is not there. The environment is not there to leave. Like we would be a premium target for like a PanFam Winter Co kind of invasion. Like, look at this. Isn't that a great project? Wouldn't that be content?
They've got a lifestyle that complements each other, right? You've, what the Imperium, well, what the Initiative excels at, the Imperium doesn't do so well at. And when the Imperium is very good at turtling up and defending sovereignty and
think we're a
structures,
good
they're
team.
fantastic at that, and they get involved. So you don't need to do exactly the same thing.
Well,
wholesome vibes. Come on, man.
well.
I think my personal opinion, Pando, is that in it eventually leaving the Imperium would set off a very interesting chain of dominoes, and I don't think it would necessarily end with in it getting invaded. But that's just my perspective.
If Horde leaves all coalitions, like cuts all ties, I'm sure I can talk Shines into leaving the Imperium. I think that's just a fair deal.
Well,
right?
We started the process, man. We started it.
You guys started the process of leaving the coalitions?
No, that's what that was my point about fires. We started, started the dissolution of this sort of greater, anti-imperium sort of post World War B thing that was going on. And Test is, like a lot of the strength that was there after World War B is sort of, PanFam is not in the same situation that it was. Test is really no longer a big factor, and some of them came to Horde, but definitely not all of them. A lot of them sort of spread around the universe, and Legacy's gone, Fire's gone. So it's pretty much just PanFam now, and Winterco, and who knows? I think part of the reason that we don't have more fights with Winterco is just mostly time zone based, but
we have some sort of strategic. I don't understand.
Well, but you have to remember. So there was a lot of complaining when we came up the first time about us not fighting Winterco. I'm sure BJK can remember. We certainly tried, but the problem is it's just like a time zone issue.
Yeah,
right?
I'm aware of the time zone issue.
Yeah. So there's the US time zone is quite turbulent at the moment in Pureblind. It's mostly which side can get an initial ref off over the other. It's been quite interesting. I think when the first time BFL deployed across the Pureblind, we were already fighting outnumbered as Winterco. As soon as you see groups of like 100 plus retributions or like a 150 man paladin or Barghest fleet, that's like you can't realistically get involved with that because we were working on different objectives back then. So realistically, do I try and fight that head on? Probably not.
And it wasn't necessarily because we were trying to help you, BJK, that we shot B3 more. Like there actually wasn't much coordination. It was just that like we could see like, hey, like BJK would have 50 dudes and Starfleet would have 250. If we try to help the 250, there's just no fight, right? Like then nobody wins. Like nothing happens. So when we were in that situation before, now we actually worked with B3 to kill Fraternity a couple of times in Chinese time zone because that was when it made sense, right? Because B3 couldn't get enough to contest, and then we couldn't get enough to contest alone. But like there was one very nice fight that we had in sort of like really late US, like really super early, like just when the Chinese players were getting on, and that was actually super fun. But it's that kind of thing is hard to replicate. But we did work with both sides actually, and so it's just the challenge is that it's very hard to for us to really have too much engagement with Winterco based on the way that the time zones work. So, and of course now we're on contract, so now we're not gonna now we're not trying to fight them anymore, but we were in the previous one.
All right.
Took a bit of sitting back and trying to read how the map was moving back then. We could see just what was in the area. We knew what could log into that Fortizar. So yeah, at the time it wasn't realistic for us to try and make any headway, but there were some fun fights and good opportunities there. I remember the Zero Tag YB Dreads dropped on the UMI gate. That was a good day.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was joking when all the brave people were like whining that we didn't shoot FRT or something. I always pointed out to them that we killed more FRT Dreads than they ever did, which was actually true. So we did more on that front in some ways, but it's just like that only happened once because it's just the time zones were extremely they just never lined up to us getting a fight with Winterco, and so we certainly tried though, but it just didn't line up.
I kind of want to go back to that one question I asked, which is like, where, like, what do you think is going to happen next, right? I know Securitas, you said like you think it's going to be like small fights and just like, you know, be a small conflict for a while. But what's going to be the end result of this all? What do you think? Like, what's going to be, like, let's say, what's realistic, a realistic time frame? Let's say half a year. What do you think this looks like in half a year? I mean, I'm not gonna
Are you
name.
asking me or BJK
I
or
mean,
either one?
I kind of asked you both, right? Like you already laid out kind
Yeah.
of what you thought, so maybe you want to finish that because I think we intersected and talked
Yeah.
about some other stuff.
I think it'll look very much the same as now, honestly. Like I think the lines, the battle lines will be, and the territorial lines will be very similar. Um, unless something huge changes, like unless first, they just fire collapses and it's like if it was only GTC and it's us plus FRT, I think we could probably make inroads, but I don't see that happening. So I think probably like we are able to sort of hold the line. So maybe if GTC were planning on invading to take some space for fire, maybe that won't happen now. Like maybe we can hold them off. So which is actually a good scenario, right? Then FRT kind of get what they're paying for. They don't lose any space. They don't make any progress. But on the flip side, I don't think we'll make, and I'm just being honest. I mean, I hope we do better than that. But just being perfectly realistic, I don't think we'll make a ton of, sovereignty iHub progress. I'd like to be proven wrong, but just from a purely technical standpoint, I think the lines will look very similar. Maybe I think there will be some big fights. We may lose some, we may win some. Hopefully, we win more than we lose. But I think there may be dread brawls or who knows. But I just think at the end of the day that the SOV and the structures probably won't change too much.
All right. What do you think, BJK?
Well, I think the next few weeks are going to be the teller for the next few months, given that this has already been going on for 8 months so far, and we've not really had any head-on skirmishes in the defenders' key time zone. The next few weeks, I'd say, are going to be the big tell for that. We know that Fireco have been promised branch, but not by us, who currently live up there. So depending on how aggressive they try and go for branch, that could give us some more opportunities to make realistic pushes into fade. It's far too turbulent to tell realistically, but we know we're in a position now that we're just simply not going to back down from it. But the ball is pretty much in their court to see how aggressive they want to be now. If they get the confidence that they've got some good numbers on CTAs that they're willing to throw down, we're in a position now that we're ready to throw down as well. But the next few weeks are going to be an indicator. I think this is far too early to project what's going to happen there.
All right. What?
What do you think? What do you think, Pando? I'm curious.
All right. You want like how precise should I be in my prediction? Let's see. Maybe I hit the nail on the head, right? So I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I mean, give it your best. Give it your best. Let's see.
I'm gonna say.
I think none of us really know for sure, right? So.
Okay, NC is gonna deploy. Numbers are gonna go up for your side. It's gonna look grim for B3. They're already they have been in this fight for a long time. Don't forget that, right? Yes, time zone wise, you guys have so much more to fall back on, right? So it's gonna look grim for them. And I don't know if it's gonna be in it or Goons. I think someone's gonna deploy up there, even it out, or more, right? Maybe even tip the scales hard in B3 favor. And then maybe Horde might just deploy and say look, this is fun, but I don't think there's going to be supers and titans going to be deployed there, right? And then I think the end result is going to be that now B3 is going to be pushed into the Imperium, onto the Imperium side. They're going to be their own coalition at the end of the day, but they're forced to do this. They're kind of that's what it is now. And I think the space, hopefully it still looks the same. Maybe you guys lose branch. If they were promised branch, maybe branch gets killed. I don't know. But that's maybe just in a year, not a half a year. I think this is going to be a long process. So that's my prediction for the whole thing.
So Pando, out of curiosity, like let's say that like, you know, FRT and BFL and stuff, like we're not pushing on B3 at all. And like, do you think, just out of curiosity, that like let's say that like B3 like had no pressure from my side or from BJK side, do you think like Init would be like pushing on them instead to try to get content? Like do you think that like it's
No.
just because of the way that things worked out that this dynamic is like, oh, they might go to Imperium, they might like, do you think there could have been a reverse situation that might have happened? Because like everyone needs content, right? And there's a big EU block right
It,
next to Init. This
I would
sounds pretty
say
spicy, right?
it could happen, but I think not at this time. Like if you, let's
No,
say
I know. I'm
XX
just
and
saying,
so
like,
on,
do you
the
think
Fire
it could
guys,
have happened?
yeah, if they settle up there and it's a strong coalition, they're in a good spot and stuff, I think totally that would have been a target for a deployment. Totally. Like what else? Like we talked about that earlier, right? Where else would you go?
Yeah,
Like there's no NPC
yeah.
space in drone space, so like I can't deploy and like hit Horde in any kind of way. Like the border of Vienna to hit Fraternity, you know, we talked about the time zone issue. It seems like not so fun, right? I mean, one way to get around the time zone issue is what Fraternity also did, is like you anchor a citadel and say like, hey, you know, you want to attack our thing in your space, right? So you kind of, you know, turn the tables a little bit and you be the defender in hostile space, but I don't know, right? You could do it, but yeah, it would be the only target really, right? Yeah. And that's the part of the sad part. That's why I don't understand your argument for a better environment after Fire being evicted. Like, what makes that a better environment? You would have had 2 targets to deploy. You could have deployed to B2, or you could have deployed to Fire, right? So it's like you cut your options in half. So it's like,
Well, better
what's
for
better
my
about that?
sake and better for the game as a whole, I think, are different potentially.
Well, yeah, I mean, sure. But yeah, I mean, there you go. We have the predictions, so I guess we need to make we need to do another podcast in like half a year and talk about it, see what actually happened.
You should move one of your Bridge Titans to the Forge or Venal and do your Kikimora fleets from there rather than relying on Drifter wormholes. I'd like to see what you can. I'd be curious to see if the format you have would work from deployment or if it only works from home. I think you mentioned like how much fun we're having staging in our home and traveling by ansiblexes. But
Well, I mean,
kill
kikis are great, but they're not great at fighting hacks. They're not. I mean,
no,
we've
no,
fought hacks before, but you know, you kind of have to catch
So
people off guard. As soon as it's about an objective, it's very hard to get anywhere
but
with
it doesn't
kikis.
have to be objective driven. I think
Yeah,
the
but like,
context of what I'm saying is that what's going to happen to the game if all the people move around the map? Like, there's going to be nothing to do. Well, there's always going to be something to do. There's always going to be the Rockle not on comms
yeah,
or
but there's no
the
reason to
super
move
with.
around the map. You can just build a jump bridge network right to the staging. So,
well,
We
so
could take a
yeah,
drift the wormhole
so
straight to where the rock is.
well,
no, Pando's 100% correct. I think like the way that ANSIs are now is one of the worst things for the game. It's like the thing that makes a lot of the way that the game is, like a lot of the sort of paralysis and stagnation, it comes from the fact that Goons or Init or Horde or Frat can just sort of like teleport like 3 or 4 regions in like a few minutes. And so like if a fight happens that's like too interesting, like you don't have to put a lot of effort into moving or staging, or it kind of
yeah.
trivializes those things. You could just like take your, so, one of those examples I think is actually in Q5. I'm sure you remember that, Pando, or I don't know, if you weren't that involved in Alliance stuff, you might not. We basically got in a huge brawl with like tons of dreads and stuff against Volta and stuff. And it was like really bloody on both sides, but we were kind of pulling ahead, even though we kind of had less people because we were in our paladins and blah, blah, blah. But what basically happened is that, there's 10% tie-dye, there's dreads dying, and like everyone in the game looks at that system and is like, oh, let's go there, you know? And so
Yeah,
Init and
and they
Goons like
can.
both formed. And so within like 20 minutes, like we had to start leaving because there's like 500 people who are able to get there in 20 minutes and like the fight's over. And so a lot of those interesting fights just never happen for that reason. And I'm sure that happens the reverse with Horde too, right? Like people don't want to get in big brawls close to drone regions because some rando will ping for 250 hacks and be there in 20 minutes, which is like just absurd. And same with Titans. Everything gets less fun the more Titans there are around, but that's a separate issue, I guess. But
also, so it's a very similar issue to what you talked about earlier, within it being coalition less for a long time, but then we were forced to join a coalition. Back then it was Titans and Supers just having perfect projection, right? You just light a Cyno chain, you're instantly there basically. You just have to wait the 15 minutes, the 15 second session timer, and you can jump onto the next Cyno if you have the cap. So it's like, it was so fast that you're like, there was just not much we could do. You feel some dread somewhere, a bubble goes up, PL is being called in, and the Cyno chain is lit. And then it's like a huge group of Supers and Titans would just be on the way instantly, right? And now it's the soft version with anti-plexes. It's the same thing, just a little different. But yeah.
I get that. I didn't mean to like downplay the anti-plex projection over the traveling through the wormholes. But my comment being more around.
No. That's not the point I was making, BJK. But the point I was making is that, like, what Pando said about the state of the game, how there's not very many places to go. A lot of the reasons for that is because people turtle up because, like, the end of one ANSI network is like usually the beginning of the other from the other side. So there's nowhere to hide for the most part. I guess the southeast for a little while, but like there's nowhere to hide from this stuff. And so like people just like, oh, why bother like setting up shop? Like I can just like, there's no local conflicts anymore, right? So I mean, really there should be a big advantage to being deployed or to living somewhere, right? That should give you a big advantage. People should not just be able to like chill in 4 regions away and be able to influence that fight to such an extent, right? You should have to put effort into that. And that's one of the reasons the game is the way it is. Like, there's not a lot of local superiority. It's just like if you can form and go through an Ansiblex network, you can project power like way, way too far. And, to some extent that holds true in a different way for like Titans and super fleets. Like they're very oppressive in other ways on like tamping down on fights and stuff like that, but that's a whole separate issue. I think the game would be a lot better if ANSIs had a polarization timer and there were like, Titans were either really shit or just didn't exist except for the bridge module or something. I don't know. But I'm just saying like that is actually a big problem is the ANSIs. And that's like I think there'd be a lot more people willing to fracture their blocks and live independently and do their own stuff if they knew that like people would actually have to come deploy to evict them, and like it would be like a big effort instead of just like, oh hey, also, let's send our fleets of hacks over.
Yeah, I always see it like if like for example all there's a neutral space now, PWs or so. Technically, yes, it's a lot of free space, but like there's gonna be jump bridges there and stuff like this. And especially when you want to move your alliance, a smaller alliance, let's say, next to a big block, it's basically you stepping in front of like a gun and just hoping the guys don't fucking shoot you. You know what I mean? It's like you're putting yourself in that position, just trusting that big group is not gonna pull the trigger, even by accident. Like we talked earlier, like it always starts with like, oh, some noble fucking idea of like, hey, we're just making this game better. You know what I mean? But the end result is always the same too. So, it's rough, right? But yeah.
Yeah. I do think that is like one very simple change, though. I think that would totally change the game like overnight, basically. Like if ANSIs were not nearly as strong, and I mean they would have to be substantially nerfed. I think there's a role for them, but I don't think you should be able to chain them as easily, right? If that goes away, suddenly the game is just very, very different in a lot of ways, right? Because of the nerfs to capital projection, there's only subcap projection now, and the blocks are so big that like, you could have 2 or 3 hack fleets coming your way if a fight kicks off. So like nobody wants to start those fights, right? Like honestly, we were kind of crazy for taking that fight. Like it should have gone way, way worse for us, and it almost did. But like, we kind of were like, well, let's just do it, but like on paper, it was not a very smart decision because like we basically knew that was going to happen, like 100%, right? Like we start getting in a fight, there's like hundreds of billions of ISK of dreads on field, and like people can snap their fingers and teleport some hack fleets there in 20 minutes. Like we kind of knew that was going to happen, but like most people can't afford to take those kind of losses regularly. So there's a lot of fights that just never happen because people just know, hey, if I get in this fight anywhere near the edge of an Ansiblex network plus a Titan bridge of a major block, like they're going to come crash the party like within half an hour. And like most fights that are worth,
Yeah,
like
the odd
news
fight,
articles and stuff, they go for that long.
the odd
Especially with
fight here and
tie-dye.
there is not the issue, right? But as soon as there's a conflict that goes on for a little longer, then shit will be in place and people will be ready, of course, right? But
Yeah. I mean, if it's like a one-off thing, maybe, but like most like fights that are like worth, like there's, like a big part of the fun of Eve is like the grudge match part of it, right? Like it's what motivates you to try hard. Like, oh, like, obviously it all stays in game, but you're like, oh, like fuck these people. It's worth it to me to stay up that extra hour to like log off the Sinowalt here or whatever, right? And so like most of the conflicts that have big fights, it's not just like a one-off like fun brawl or something, right? It's like there's things leading up to it, so people will be ready to take advantage of that.
yeah.
And it's so easy to do. So I mean, that is really something. Like if CCP fixed that, I think it would just change the game overnight. I mean, it would be totally different.
It's one of those things that I like since the CSM campaign and everything I've been talking about, right? Like I'm trying to, get it done, but like we'll see. Hopefully at some point they will touch up Citadels in general, but Ansiblexes.
That's what leads to turtling, right? Is like if it's so easy to project force, everyone's kind of got to huddle up with their friends to like, because like the other people are going to do it, so like we have to be ready to do it too, right? So it like promotes this sort of attitude where you have to stay in this big blob, everyone has to stage together, like, you know what I mean? And so that really needs to be taken care of. I'm hoping CCP is listening, or I'm sure I'm not anywhere near the first person to have this idea or to think of it, so I'm sure it's been raised to them like 100 times, but they really should do something about that, because as someone, I've been like FCing, like, there was a period in the last 6 months where I was FCing almost every day these kind of fights. And so I think at least for the current time, I have some insight as to like what sort of how the environment around the fights like shapes what happens and what doesn't. And the Ansiblex is like a huge part of what makes fights not happen or be smaller than they would have been or less interesting. Like all the power projection is a big problem. Anyway, sorry, that was me on my soapbox. But
yeah, we could talk about Ansiblexes. That's another full fucking podcast, right? There's so many like the opinions, and then some people say like they are making stuff happen because otherwise you wouldn't get to the fight. But like, yeah, sure, there are fights that happen only because there's an Ansiblex network there. But like, okay, let's not even get into this. I think
those are pretty rare.
Yeah, I know, no. But long term, it's just like it's sure there is, but like the environment would be way better if they weren't there, and you wouldn't have to travel all that far. But like whatever, they're the solution to their own problem. Right. Is what I always say. Right, the problem they create, they also kind of solve it, but only to 50%. You know what I mean? So at the end, 50% of content is gone.
Yeah.
But
because imagine you start your own small alliance and you take whatever Scalding Pass or something, or and the world where there is Ansiblexes kind of leading up to the edge of your space and the one where there isn't are just very different. Like one of them, you have to like step on eggshells and not piss off any of the blocks because like, they don't even have to deploy, right? They could just say, hey, max form like, 250 Eagles and we're going to come reinforce your staging Fort iHub. And like, we only have to follow up on it like 2 times. So we just, we don't even have to deploy. Versus, hey, like, is it really worth, like, there's this 200-man alliance, like, do we really hate them that much that we want to have to deploy over there and, like, like, all that stuff, right? So it's, like, suddenly a very different world where you can be more provocative, you can do your own thing, and not have to worry that much that, 250 hacks are just going to teleport on top of you with no effort.
Yeah. All right, guys. I expected this episode to be way shorter. We've been stretching this quite long. I mean, we can dive into all kinds of topics. Obviously, there's like so many things we can talk about. And then also our predictions for Javier. So I guess in Javier, at the very least, we'll have the chance to talk again. We'll have to, come back and see like who was right or like how far. Actually, nobody's gonna be right. Okay, how far off is everyone? But yeah,
When I'm tuning in from Obin Losek.
yeah. But I think it is time to call it. And I guess I want to thank you guys for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you guys, even though we didn't agree on, I'd say, most things. But on some key things we do agree. I think that was pretty clear too. So yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Sorry for my really shitty mic. Hopefully it's better now.
At the end, it was really good. The
Okay.
test run was good. Then in the middle, it kind of shit itself, and at the end, it was good again. But yeah, thanks for coming on.
Cheers. Thanks for having us. See you in Pure Blind soon then, yeah, Pando?
Yeah, we'll see. And on stream, you guys also, thanks for hanging out. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And see you guys around, right? Bye-bye.
All right. See ya.
Cheers.